Huq.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Select Committee Chair who speaks with such passion and authority on what's a very displeasurable subject that we're considering today. The wave of popular uprisings that have erupted across Iran have woken up the world to its top-down totalitarian regime at its most inhumane. At the start of last autumn, Mahsa Amini was not a household name. But in the aftermath of her supposed death in custody for miswearing a hijab, this 22-year-old has become the rallying cause behind a surge of popular protest. They're often young, often women, publicly removing their enforced headscarves and setting them alight, chanting for freedom, cutting their hair in defiance of a brutal, theocratic regime. But men, too, have taken to the streets. It's not just women. And although they're often just teenagers, this is a movement that cuts across gender, across generation and class. And the regime's response? Violent crackdown, more bloody suppression, killing, sham trials, and barbaric public executions, 4 since December alone, 2 this weekend alone. Over 100 at imminent risk of execution, plus routine censorship, monitoring, and poverty to the point that lack of water is a concern. Predictably, the gas and oil profits that go to that country do not reach the people. Recent mobilisations have reverberated with solidarity protests across continents. And my seat has amassed the fourth highest number of signatures behind those 2 petitions that launched this debate. And on home turf, Ealing, by 2021 census figures, ranks 4th highest of all UK local authorities for population born in Iran, and 4th highest, there's a pattern here, isn't there, of Iranian passport holders. At my primary school, Montpelier, in 1978, I remember an influx of new classmates coming from Tehran in anticipation of the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Following unrest at the time, and that revolution that brought the Ayatollah Khomeini and his evil brand of clerical rule to power. And because I was just 6 at the time, I wasn't really following the politics of it. But I do remember England did not qualify for the World Cup that year, and Blue Peter suggested supporting Scotland. But in our class, Iran was the top choice. Contrast those, for me, innocent days with the shame our diaspora community felt this time round for supporting Iran and, by extension, the Iranian regime. When the current team chose not to sing the national anthem in support of the ongoing protests, all 11 of them, in silence as the music played in that stadium, Flushie Stadium in Qatar, it was a massive statement taking huge courage. And it's truly sickening to see just this week 26-year-old Iranian footballer Amir Nazar Azatadani sentenced to 16 years in prison for taking part in nationwide protests. The offence is sinisterly termed partaking in enmity against God, even though the laughably named morality police have been disbanded. And we've heard the roll call of other names of people today. My constituents, who this debate has sparked great interest amongst, have furnished me with shocking detail of what's unfolding back home to add to the shocking statistics, but they're not shocking enough. So 4 months after the killing of Mahsa Amini, it's estimated 516 protesters have been killed in anti-government protests in Iran, many more maimed and tortured. Human rights activist HRANA say the dead include 70 children, and approximately 70% of the population in Iran are under the age of 30. And the number of people arrested now at 19,200, it's going up by the minute. That includes 687 students, and there are really scary stories of how food in student canteens has been poisoned even as part of this. A lady in Ealing told me, "My own cousin was abducted, blindfolded, with her hands and feet tied, thrown in a van and taken to an unknown location, all for chanting the word freedom. She's 25 and was beaten so severely, then thrown off from the van. She was so distorted she had no idea where she was. It took my family 24 hours to locate her. However, we're extremely lucky that she was not raped or killed." My cousins have to burn things like paper or clothing to be able to breathe in order to cancel out the gases that the regime releases in order to deter protesters. Another, who's actually ex-Montpellier Primary, as am I, although she's a lot younger than me, like everyone seems to be nowadays. Another highlights how this repression is not new. My father was also taken and put in the notorious Evin prison 9 years ago. They accused him of being a spy. He was 69 at the time, and he experienced 2 months of solitary confinement. He eventually went into a diabetic coma as they wouldn't give him his meds. He nearly died. Others describe how minority populations, such as the Iranian Kurds and another one from Balochistan, are even further at the sharp end of this brutal tyranny. The Iranian regime does all it can to suppress protests and quell news of it spreading by cutting the internet and spreading a campaign of disinformation on state and social media. And while it's reassuring to see our Foreign Secretary summoned Iran's most senior diplomat after the regime executed 2 more protesters only this weekend, after what the UN labelled unfair trials based on forced confessions, widespread international condemnation, including from the EU and numerous nation states, must be matched with concrete action. We've had a lot of suggestions today. Why should women have men dictate what they do or do not wear, putting them in fear of violent reprisals? A signatory of international treaties which grant citizens, that includes women, that includes children. Iran is a signatory to conventions on the rights of children. Given the age of these protesters, these treaties that they've signed up to ensure basic rights and freedoms. The authorities have an obligation to respect freedom of expression and belief. Instead, it has hijacked a peaceful global religion with its twisted Shia sectarian anti-Western worldview, and it calls itself Islamic Republic. So what can and should we do to support the Iranian people fighting for freedom? One Iranian-born woman who came to my advice surgery the other day was asking, why is my adopted country staying silent and harbouring criminals? Well, I mean, we've not exactly stayed silent, but we could do better. This House should express its solidarity with the Women, Life, Freedom movement. There are 5 steps it could take immediately, relatively easily. Number 1, the Prime Minister must condemn the executions. We're talking about the death penalty here. We need to stop the executions. And I'd be curious to know from the Minister, we should be looking into this notion of members of this House acting as political sponsors. I think we've all had emails. I'm unsure how that works. I'd like to hear from the Minister what the exact mechanics of that are. But to act as political sponsors of those facing execution and imprisonment for exercising their right to peaceful protest following bogus trials. Number 2, if we're not yet banning it, Number 2, yes, we should designate, obviously, the Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. They've done it in the US, France, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These are all allies of ours. And thirdly, there's something we can do even before banning it. We could extend sanctions to go beyond named IRGC regime officials and extend to their close family members. It's an open secret that many of the regime's family members and oligarchs live, have property and or assets, and operate businesses in the UK. And we saw Magnitsky-style sanctions come into action very quickly after the invasion of Ukraine. The same sort of thing should be happening here. The Met Police and the NCA could between them set up a unit to identify who these people are and seize their assets. Fourthly, we must stop supplying anti-riot equipment directly or indirectly to the Iranian regime. It's a matter of shame that there's solid evidence that tear gas made in the UK has been used against protesters despite sanctions. Shocking. Number 5, my honourable friend, he's gone now, but a long-time Ealing councillor he was, the member for Leeds Central, did talk about the media. We must stop the closure of BBC Persian service at this critical moment where it's needed now more than ever. I mean, for Iranians, it's the only independent media source out there. It just seems unbelievable. It's putting hundreds of jobs at risk, and it's due to have the plug pulled this April, despite 18 million regular users. As Iran, we've heard, shuts down the internet and imprisons journalists on spurious charges of terrorism, such as the two brave women who broke the Mahsa Amini story. They want to curtail information flow. We cannot allow that to happen. Rosa Parks, Emmeline Pankhurst, these women's names are inscribed onto our history. The struggles that they fought led to action. Let Mahsa Amini's death be the start of a different, new Iranian revolution towards freedom, justice, and democracy. It is time for Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, woman, life, freedom.